الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته قول ديالي ودق ماليال أنتو وليبوا ورتيلك أرلاadi ka dhawaada barnaamijka Arrimaha Caalamka wararka weyn barnaamijka oo nimadan ka jiran waliba kumidaha khudbad aqalka Congress-ka Mareykanka Tijeedi Benjamin Netanyahu ra'iisul wasaaraha Israa'iil iyo kudurtiisa dad badan walina siyaabo shirkad sanadka ka farcilin barnaamijka Sinkayna boqorka Jordan Abdullah lamaadna waliba uu shal diray baarlamaanka markaasii baarlamaanka cusub ee bilaa September yana ka hor doorashada fulishan barnaamijka Sinkayna xaalad cimilada ka jirta Nairobi Kenya diyaaradaha caalamiga iyana garoonka Jomo Kenyatta ka degwaan iyadoo lagu weeci dhinaca Mombasa barnaamijka Sinkay afayeenkii maridii golaha wakiilada Mareykanka Nancy Pelosi waliba iyo wal markaasii tiriliyaha tilmaantay khudbadda Netanyahu iyadana sumcad dil ka tilmaantay taasintiyada barnaamijka Arrimaha Caalamka ee Warteelka Arlaadi iyo Sinkay qodobada kale Sinkay waliba kumidaha sarkaalkan ka saray militariga Ingiriiska General Lord Walker iyo waliba sheegay in diyaar garoohayan 6 sano gudaasho dagaal sabab la xiriirta xaaladda kacsanaanta ee adduunka barnaamijka iyo asiinku gudbiyana qodobadaas iyo warar kale oo ugu ka jirana barnaamijka Arrimaha Caalamka ee Warteelka Arlaadi barnaamijka Arrimaha Caalamka ee Warteelka Arlaadi ee daratan taariikhdu waliba 25 July sanada 2024 qodobka kubin ee Israa'iil iyo saasato Netanyahu khudbadu isku jeedi Congress-ka Mareykanka falcelinta ka dhalatay barnaamijka Sinkayna bal ku horeysiilay boqorka Jordan Abdullah lamaad iyo waliba uu shal diray min ka hoos ee baarlamaanka dalkaasi ka hor doorashada baarlamaanka cusub ee bilaa September Jordan iyo leta baarlamaan lama aqalay oo ka kooban guurtida oo magacaabo boqorkiiyo kan min ka hoos oo waa ay kala doorado ana soo gordow min ka wakiilada maxkamadda boqortooyada Jordan iyo go'aankan ka dhawaaqday manabin sharaxaad markaasii balse talaabadan iyo leeyahay eediyaase xilli gudaha Jordan ka jarta kacdoon dadweyne oo markaasii ka diidjin nidaamka boqortooyada iyo sii socodon dagaal qaza inta marxalad anfaylahayn qoysaska boqorada maamulka Carabta ana soo bulshadiyo ka dhirfin sidii وأن كان تلاقون روجي وحسوق فلسطينيين برنامجك Arrimaha Caalamka daratan diyaaradaha iyo awoodin in lahayn in iyo markaasii kadeen garoonka diyaaradaha Jomo Kenyatta ee magaalada Nairobi sabab la xiriir xaalad cimilada ka jirta meela iyo diyaaradaha Kenya Airways door duulimaad la qorsheeyay inuu waa in ka degta Nairobi wana lagnay dhinaca Mombasa saasad diyaar kale oo qoyan Doha Qatar iyo meel kale iyo langwaaci dhinaca Mombasa iyo Zanzibar iyo ka degan warbaahinta Kenya iyo arintan suuqinka faladaha xitaa geega barnaamijka Arrimaha Caalamka daratan kolkan Netanyahu waliba uu khudbadka jeediyay minkeed ee Mareykanka afayeenkii maridii wakiilada Mareykanka Nancy Pelosi waliba ay tan ka tilmaantay fadeexad in keeta wana ku xumaan ajnabi waa qof ajnabi in la ka sharaf inuu ka hor hadlo Congress-ka Mareykanka in dadka Amerikaanka in ku weeran casiin saasaad sanasir Bernie Sanders oo ka tirsan xisbiga dimuqraadiga iyo waliba dhaleecay Netanyahu kureed khudbadiisa Congress-ka Netanyahu ma kaliya dambiile xitaa beenaalo yeeri saasaadto dadka Netanyahu khudbadiisa ka tilmaaman tanasibra waliba iskiran dad Mareykanka roon iyo dad kale oo shil gadisan Netanyahu khudbadiisa ku horjeeda Congress waliba ka tilmaamay dadka Mareykanka ee ka horjeedan xasuuqa Israa'iil injay sida ay Falastiiniyiinta in markaasii ay dad nacsiin أنا تحيي سهلة يقولي بيتين حبناها كونغرس كأمريكا مركز قطبة يريد النوع عسى وسمراي نتنياهو سهكورجي حقوق ذا الشرع ومؤدرين تا يو أرنتنا كهذا رأي يعني حشب لبن تعصد بدن كبير فيدي وكو بنجامين نتنياهو رئيس وزراء إسرائيل أو خطبة كجيريو كونغرس كأمريكا.
We recently learned from the National Security Director of U.S. Director of National Intelligence that Iran is funding and promoting anti-Israel protests in America. They want to disrupt America. So these protesters burn American flags even on the 4th of July. And I wish to salute the fraternity brothers at the University of North Carolina who protected the American flag against these anti-Israel protesters. we know, Iran is funding the anti-Israel protests that are going on right now outside this building. Not that many, but they're there, and throughout the city. Well, I have a message for these protesters. When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. Some of these protesters, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Some of these protesters hold up signs proclaiming gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC. These protesters chant from the river to the sea, but many don't have a clue what river and what sea they're talking about. They not only get an F in geography, they get an F in history. They call Israel a colonialist state. Don't they know that the land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed, where Isaiah and Jeremiah preached, and where David and Solomon ruled? For nearly 4,000 years, the land of Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people. It's always been our home. It will always be our home. It's not only the campus protesters who get it wrong. It's also the people who run those campuses. 80 years after the Holocaust, the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and I'm ashamed to say my alma mater, MIT, couldn't bring themselves to condemn the calls for the genocide of Jews. You remember what they said? They said, it depends on the context. Well, let me give these befuddled academics a little context. Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. For centuries, the massacre of Jews was always preceded by wild accusations. We were accused of everything from poisoning wells to spreading plagues, to using the blood of slaughtered children to bake Passover matzahs. These preposterous anti-Semitic lies led to persecution, mass murder, and ultimately to history's worst genocide, the Holocaust. Now, just as malicious lies were leveled for centuries at the Jewish people, malicious lies are now being leveled at the Jewish state. No, don't applaud. Listen. The outrageous slanders that paint Israel as racist and genocidal are meant to delegitimize Israel, to demonize the Jewish state, and to demonize Jews everywhere. And no wonder we've witnessed an appalling rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. My friends, whenever and wherever we see the scourge of anti-Semitism, we must unequivocally condemn it and resolutely fight it, without exception. And don't be fooled when the blood libels against the Jewish state come from people who wear fancy silk robes and speak in lofty tones about law and justice? Here's a case in point. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of...
He continued to bring it back to Iran, the country that is, by all accounts, funding and supporting not just Hamas in Gaza, but Hezbollah in the north, in Lebanon, and the Houthis. So this was another really important overarching theme, you know, that Netanyahu understandably has been obsessed with, the growth and the strength and the determination of Iran to eradicate Israel. And what he did here was to continue to connect for an American audience and an Israeli audience, but Israel doesn't need to be educated on this, but more for an American audience, that Iran isn't just out for Israel. Iran is out for to topple American democracy.
No, that's right. And he called the protesters Iran's useful idiots. He relished going after the protesters, saying that they didn't realize, didn't know the history, know the context, know how oppressive the Iranian regime is, and he relished it. I mean, this was, he was going after these protesters, going after the leaders of some of these schools. He called them befuddled academics. We're 10 months into this conflict. We're 100 days out from a presidential election. In some ways, the conflict has fallen off the radar of many Americans. It's going to start back up, right? If you think about what's happening in the context of some of these campus protesters, they're going to go back to school. There's going to be a DNC convention in Chicago, expected to be a lot of protesters there. So this is very much going to be top of mind heading into this election. And we don't quite know. We don't have, an idea yet of what Trump would really do in office. It's something he hasn't really detailed. And we also don't know what a Kamala Harris administration would do and how that would be different from a Biden administration.
What did you think of that reception he received in the Congress, though? That was powerful.
It was powerful. Listen, and these are Republicans, mostly. A lot of the Democrats didn't come, although some Democrats were there and they were standing up and cheering. And listen, there is a sense that Americans do need to be more educated on what's going on there, on the history of anti-Semitism, on the ways in which anti-Semitic tropes led to the Holocaust. And so there was teachable moments, right, when he was trying to educate people in terms of the history.
Jeremy Diamond is in Israel. And Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about the hostages. And I talked to, right before this speech, to the parents of one of the Israeli and American hostages, Idan Alexander, and the parents were there. Other family members of hostages were there. We did see the Prime Minister call out some of them, acknowledge some of them, and then when it comes to the big question that they all have, when are my family members going to come home? He did promise that, but just like David and Barack were saying, not a lot new that we heard from him about getting to that point with a deal with Hamas, with the help of Qatar and America.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. I think the Israeli Prime Minister paid a lot of lip service to the issue of the hostages. He talked about it during a section of his speech. But if you look at the overall context of the speech, the overall content of what the Israeli Prime Minister said, he talked far, far more about achieving victory in this war against Hamas, about destroying Hamas's military capabilities, and vowing we will fight until we achieve victory. He said a phrase like that a few different times throughout the speech. He talked about that far more than he did this ceasefire agreement, which U.S. officials as well as Israeli officials have indicated to me in recent days is very much within reach. One official actually told me that it's now up to Israel, that it's now up to the Israeli Prime Minister effectively to decide whether or not he actually wants a deal. And as Barack was saying there, the Israeli Prime Minister has told his delegation to hold off on traveling to meet with the mediators and share Israel's latest response until after he meets with President Biden tomorrow, effectively pushing off that trip by the delegation most likely until after Shabbat, so that would probably be on Sunday. But I think beyond that, Dan, I think what we also need to do here is fact check a few key things that the Israeli Prime Minister said, because he made several claims here that attempted to not only defend the Israeli military's conduct in Gaza, but that also flew in the face of many of the facts on the ground. When he was talking about the ICC's claim claim that Israel is starving people of Gaza. You know, he talked about big numbers of aid getting in, but there is just very, very clear evidence. You talk to any humanitarian organization that actually works on the ground in Gaza, the United Nations, and even when you look at Israel in the way that they have turned on and back off the faucet of aid to Gaza, there is clear evidence that Israel has not always allowed enough aid in, that they have not done enough to deconflict militarily, to provide safe routes for that aid to get in. And you also have to remember that members of Netanyahu's own government called for starving the people of Gaza in the earliest days of the war. Then he also made this frankly laughable claim that there are practically no civilians who were killed in Rafah. I can think of several strikes in which civilians were killed. So that just doesn't even pass the smell test. And then he once again cited this West Point expert, John Spencer, claiming that Israel has the lowest civilian casualty ratio. You talk to any other expert on the conduct of militaries and warfare, including how the United States has carried out its campaigns, and they will all say that Israel has not taken nearly as many precautions as most modern militaries do in warfare in Gaza.
waayahay guud ahaan weli baan taas afmarana barnaamijkii Arrimaha Caalamka ee Warteelka Arlaadi.